Good afternoon, everyone. We lost our moderator, so we will do a conversation between the two of us today. I guess the reason why we are here today is because we are all noticing those days that we need a more dynamic exchange among the scientific community to actually resolve the problems that are emerging, that are more dynamic than the ways that we have in the past to have discussions among the scientific community on very complex topics, and the climate change is becoming one of those. I guess it was a process initiated almost a couple of years ago in Europe, actually to trigger these dynamics in a more efficient manner to address issues that are identified that require the community as a whole to provide solutions or to define the questions sometimes and provide the scientific solutions or scientific information that is relevant for also the interface with the policymakers and bring science to policymaking in a very efficient manner and in a very dynamic manner, because we know this is a problem. So, Frank, we are being very much engaged in this process. You have been bringing many of us to this idea. So can you elaborate a bit on how it was born and how it's been evolving and where we are today?
Okay, thank you very much, Maria, and thanks to Spain for hosting this event here, COP30. I'd like to just go back to the beginning to a certain extent, and back in 2008, the European Council had a very good idea of having what's known as joint programming for research. And what they did is to set up these joint programming initiatives on key societal challenges that face Europe and the world. And obviously that included climate change. So the Council encouraged the member states to work together to align research programs at member state level, because most research funding actually exists at member state level. But it's not just the member states of Europe, of the EU, it's the associated countries across the European research area. And there's a lot to be gained by working together, because we have a lot of common problems and common challenges. So that is the root of JPI Climate, which, as I said, was set up just over 10 years ago. Its vision is really to enable transition to a low-emission, climate-resilient economy and society and environment. And its mission is centered around providing knowledge to inform implementation of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And the way it operates is connecting knowledge providers with knowledge users and creating the environment for that. Now, I was chair for a number of years, and as chair, I wanted to look at that connecting knowledge provision with knowledge users. And I've always seen as a challenge that to get the return on investment that is essential if we are to make progress on climate change. And if we see science as fundamental to good scientific, good policy and good actions. So to advance that issue, what we did was we decided to establish a European process to accelerate the transfer of knowledge from science to policy and actions in Europe. And that process, we kicked it off in 2023, and that was the 22nd of March 2023, the vernal equinox, as you will know. And that year was just after we finished the synthesis report for the sixth assessment cycle. So we wanted to highlight that Europe is actually at the forefront of climate change research. We have excellent scientists across all of the European countries, and really that is a marvelous resource which we need to make much more use of. So we had the three IPCC co-chairs, developed country co-chairs at the meeting. That was Valerie Masson Delmont. We had Hans Otto Portner, and obviously Jim Ski, and obviously Jim is now the chair of IPCC. So the whole objective, and that meeting, that summit as we call it, was convened by Belgium, and Belgium have been very supportive of all this process. So what we wanted to do was to provide a trigger to have that space at which Europe could use these major resources that we have at our disposal, but right now we haven't got them. We often find ourselves discussing interesting science at an international level under the IPCC, or in situations like this, where we are in a very heightened political environment, which makes such discussions quite difficult. So to have a sort of a safe space in Europe where we can discuss topics, but not just discuss topics, crystallize our knowledge and provide that knowledge for policy and actions. And the thematic areas we identified for this was achievement of climate neutrality, climate resilience, and managing transition and transformation. And that was where we started off back in 2023. And I'll hand back to you, Maria, because I think I've been talking too much. You might like to add something from your side.
No, I mean, what I found along these years of the collaboration with the GPI Climate and the fact that this process has been launched in 2023 is that it's a unique space for some of us to be in questions that it require first in-depth discussions among the scientific community to actually define what the problem is and then define how we should address. And sometimes you need a very complex landscape of disciplines to do that. And we need the spaces to discuss. I mean, and unfortunately, spaces to discuss are very limited. They are very scarce. And I think one of the good things that I found on my collaboration with GPI Climate and on the process of the Equinox, and also on how the way that later on the resources are gathered in order to support these predefined exercises. One example I can mention is some work that was triggered by some of us many before 2016, where we put a question. I mean, they were putting a question towards us, saying, "Can you demonstrate that the estimations of the land use changes and emissions, removals and emissions, by models and by scientific papers is good, while the inventory aggregation is bad?" And then, well, what we said it was, we don't think it's bad or good. We think they are different. And finally, we found the space in GPI Climate to discuss this, and we produce something which is now is going to be part of the 7th cycle of the IPCC, which is that there is a big effort to reconcile, well, first to understand the differences, because you cannot compare the aggregated inventories as they are defined for the purpose of reporting, and what time series and ways to approach anthropogenic emissions the models do have. And what we demonstrated is they are good, both good, but they are different. And there is a difference between them that can be better reconciled. And they can be reconciled, or it can be translated in a way that the difference, which is due to the fact that they are for different purposes, it doesn't become the reason for a conflict between the two communities. And on the way, we are bringing even more communities into the table, like the remote sensing community, the IAMS community, and the vegetation models community. And that's been a very rich discussion. And it's going to crystallize actually in the IPCC 7th assessment report in a very well-articulated manner. And this has been an effort led by the European scientists.
Yeah, and just to say, what you're saying is one example of a topic which it is very useful to have a discussion in Europe about, because these discussions can be misinterpreted as differences and uncertainties and used in in a manner that is creating noise rather than light. And so there's been a number of opportunities for such topics, and we have discussed these over the years. And that sort of safe space, as I call it, is very important. And that was a strategic gap in the European landscape. And JPI not being one country or another, but being a combination of countries allows us to work in that space. It's not, we're not pushing any particular agenda from any particular country or group. We're trying to work together. And similarly, the other excellent example is that there has been a whole series of JPIs, and I know Ole Christian is coming to us shortly, but we've worked very closely with JPI Oceans, and JPI Oceans is a similar construct, similar but different construct, and obviously climate and oceans are intrinsically linked. And what we're doing with oceans, we already published a report on sea level rise there last year, if I remember correctly, which is a joint initiative, and we're sort of looking to build a hub in that area. And Ole Christian will talk about the work we've established on the AMOC process. The other key JPIs that we're working with are JPI on culture and heritage, and it goes back to some of the issues we're here about, here in research dialogue about the losses and damage, because culture and heritage is fundamental to human development and society. And JPI Culture and Heritage approached us a few years ago to set up a joint initiative to look at funding research on this very important topic, which is a very important subject as part of the narrative about how to address climate change. So we've had already a joint call. We're looking to further joint calls, and then we'll have joint publications on this topic. We did initiate some work with JPI FACE, but as you know, this issue of partnerships arose, and Commission's role in promoting partnerships is an interesting question in the context of JPIs. But I won't dwell on that one for now. But the other thing that we have, and it's really important, is our transdisciplinary advisory body, which you yourself chair with Wolfgang from Austria. And it might be useful just to reflect on how that works, because it's been a very useful feature, because the governing board of JPI Climate is made up of representatives from each of the member countries who are active in JPI Climate, but we do seek advice from the Transdisciplinary Advisory Board. So maybe you could just mention how that works, Maria.
Well, the Transdisciplinary Board was, I think it was also very helpful for the members of the board, because it is a representation of the actual policy side and the stakeholders that will use the knowledge that the science is producing, and the scientific part that some of us represent. So it is also an ongoing conversation among themselves to understand what the science can produce and what the needs of policy are. And matching those things is not an easy thing to do, because they have different timing. And you know, when you get the attraction of the stakeholders and the policymakers, and you are successful, then you have a problem, because they want things in a timeline that doesn't correspond to how science usually produces knowledge. So this interaction within the actual advisory board help us to find better ways to time things and phase how you translate knowledge into science, or into needs of implementers, which is actually the same. Also allows us to identify problems that the science sometimes doesn't anticipate, but the society does anticipate. So it's a sort of a trade-off and a feedback process all the time in the advisory board. We are also very pleased usually to see that the JPI Climate is able to actually, if we prioritize issues, to respond to those issues timely. It is was also fascinating that GPI Climate is being able to start integrating social issues, the social science, into the conversation, which has been a challenge that, in a way, IPCC is also facing since the fifth assessment report, and they are improving, and there is a major expectation that those things will reflect or will be fluent into the seventh assessment report. But indeed, GPI Climate, we advanced that already. So I think there are lessons that learned by us that can be by the ones that are becoming authors on the seventh cycle. It will be very helpful.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And just to say, as part of that equinox process, what we're doing is setting up a network of communication to all of the IPCC focal points in the European research area. And because we appreciate that the IPCC focal points probably know best where the challenges are for in their countries, and know how to communicate to the policy side in their countries. So I know there's a few people here who are in the IPCC networks, and so what we'd like to do is to have that sort of conversation with the IPCC focal points about the challenges that they see for the current cycle and future cycles, and where we're going with that. The other initiative that we're looking at taking is something that I suppose has arisen out of the or has been discussed here already at Earth Information Day and during the negotiations. What's happening to the global observation systems, because we know that there is a threat to the sustained observations of maintaining the observations in the oceans and cryosphere and atmosphere. There's some I suppose there's a lack of clarity what that means, although we did hear from the GCOS Secretariat at Earth Information Day about the extent of that challenge, and how their work has been undermined. So we're planning to have an event in Brussels next March that will bring together stakeholders to consider where we are in observations. Hopefully at that point we'll have more clarity on the state of play and what's being continued and what's not being continued, and that will include our colleagues from the European Space Agency and the Copernicus people, as well as I would expect some membership from the GCOS Secretariat as well. So we could have a discussion about what's happening and perhaps get more information about the extent of the loss that's happening there and what the implications are, because it's a real serious challenge that we're facing right now, that we're losing the capacity to maintain the essential observations that we need.
Yeah, I mean, and related to that, data is becoming a very important asset, and we need to make sure that it's accessible. It can be used by all communities. There is a common understanding of that, what is the quality of the data and what is the limitations that the data have, and also to interface with the modeling community, because we saw in the past that they were communities using different time series, different data, and in essence they should provide the results that should be comparable, but the data itself was not consistent or not comparable. So I think it's not only about the Earth observation. I mean, in the GST1, the Earth observation community was sitting together and produced a common document on the status of the Earth observation in terms of the new satellites, in terms of for what the remote sensing information could be used or not, and they are. I mean, GCOS is working quite hard also on see where the gaps are, and with the current situation, which is not very promising, let's say, but we can progress even with that. And another point that is related to that to me was the efforts that were made also on making sure that the communities that are working on mitigation pathways and the communities that are starting to work on adaptation pathways, they meet together and they discuss actually how they are addressing in their models that. I mean, we are seeing, for example, that the EAMS and the community, climate modeling community is trying to introduce feedbacks from climate impacts because this is one thing that we cannot avoid anymore. But at the same time, you are designing pathways for adaptation. So, I mean, you need to create spaces for those communities to work together. And GPI Climate already provide a couple of events where they were starting to discuss.
Yes, and that's a very important issue, and that goes to the challenge of transition and transformation, and that is something that's we need the social sciences, as you said earlier, and that's an important development that we have fostered. But we need to have that important dialogue that breaks down the sort of really in practice the divisions between what people do on mitigation adaptation are theoretical, because in practice what we do should address both challenges, and that's part of the transition and transformation to the future resilient climate neutral society that we want to have. And when I mentioned climate neutrality, I suppose I just want to highlight, I mentioned the event in March, but also we have a major event in May, which is the Climate Neutrality Forum 2026. And what we want to do there is to bring together the latest information on how to get to where we want to be in terms of emission reductions. It will build on mature knowledge from key actors. That will include the IGCC materials presented here, the work of the Global Carbon Project, your own work on the land-based removals, and a lot of work that's going on in the UK and elsewhere on CDR and the technological solutions which we need to scale up rapidly. One of the foci will be, since it's 10 years since the Paris Agreement, is actually how to keep 1.5 in reach. So we'll be looking very closely at what that means, and we hopefully will have some of the latest analysis from the integrated assessment modeling community and others in terms of the transition that is needed, the energy transition, the overall mitigation potential that's seen, as well as the scale of CDR. So the aim will be to put the pieces of the jigsaw together and also look at the economic aspects of that. And some of you may already have received an invite to a workshop that's happening in Brussels in December, where we're looking at the economic modeling, or the integrated assessment modeling, and how economics are included into that. Two other issues that we're going to address, which weren't a part really of the Climate Neutrality Forum in 2024, is the role of short-lived climate forces. And hopefully we'll have inputs from the Convention on Long-Range Transport of Air Pollution and their work on hemispheric transport in particular, and also the Arctic AMAP people who are doing analysis of how the Arctic warming, the amplified warming that we have in the Arctic region is seen. So what we want to do at the end is to have a report which captures the state of knowledge on mitigation, and particularly mitigation required to keep 1.5 in reach.
Well, what you mentioned is particularly relevant because in the 7th cycle, both the short-lived climate forces and the CDR have to be included in the Working Group 3 in a much more in-depth way, because as we all know, we need to understand very well on how much solutions we can count, and on the other side we need to improve the climate models and understand what actually the role of of the short life forces are. And as you know, BCC also have an effort in parallel for providing methodologies that can help to develop more consistent and more comparable results that in the future can even be the basis for including those into our inventories, the GSG inventories. So it is going to be very good if GPI climate can sort of have these safe spaces for some of us also to start advancing this work in the prevention that we will have to reflect that in the seventh cycle of the IPCC. So organizing the knowledge we have in Europe on those topics to be very clever on the inputs that need to be put to globally, I think is a very important topic.
Yeah, yes, and just to say, I see a lot of familiar faces here, so don't be shy if you want to join the conversation, because it'd be really great if you do, because it'll be useful to get any comments or any suggestions about challenges or issues or topics that JPI Climate should focus on. As I said, we have the overarching themes, and we have focus reports on sea level rise, the AMOC, stability, the AMOC, etc. But if there's other topics you think that would be useful to consider, it would be useful to hear from you, given I suppose, as I say, the audience here is quite small, so we're open to discussions, I'm sure, Maria.
No, I mean, of course, you can raise your hands anytime and we can provide a mic. And I mean, the full idea of the AGPI climate is actually to identify topics in a collective manner. And usually those are pre-identified sometimes by some countries in the European sphere.
I see Anna.
Anna.
Anna, would like to say something. So.
Yeah, thanks, Frank and Maria. It's really nice discussion. I have a question on how JPI can help bridge some of the challenges we see here in picking up very clear messages on the latest information that's relevant for the discussion. So like, for example, the state of climate, estimates of global warming, and so on and so forth. Can JPI help facilitate or inject some more clarity into this formulation of key information that feeds into a process like this? So it's very useful, I think, amongst the European community as a forum for discussion and raising awareness amongst focal points, so on and so forth. But what role can JPI make in having clearer information feeding discussions such as these here?
Thanks, Anna. That's a very interesting question, and I suppose something that I think about myself. And obviously, this forum is quite a challenge. This forum is not science friendly at times, I must say. So. What we're doing, obviously, we have this Climate Neutrality Forum in 2028. We will produce a report which should be, if I may put it like this, IPCC-like, but not IPCC, which obviously would be available for the global stocktake in 2027 if countries wish to submit it. And in that sense, it'd be very useful to bring the lessons we've learned from discussions here into how to communicate science clearly about the fundamental issues. And as I say, since we're not the IPCC, we are sort of focused on the essence of the challenge rather than the spectrum of the challenge, if I may put it like that. So I think there's a real opportunity there. Now, we have to be cognizant as well that we're not undermining the IPCC or anything like that, that we need to be aware that we are a lesser product, so to speak. But nevertheless, I think if you have the top scientists involved writing it, we do have an engagement with governments, even though it will be a much lighter engagement than with that happens under the IPCC. I think that's important. I'd also like to expand it. I mean, ideally, what I would like to do is to follow with a global, and I wouldn't call it a Climate Neutrality Forum, but I would call it something like Keeping 1.5 in Reach event at a global level that would, I think, be a a useful discussion to have because it's, as you know, none of these targets can be achieved in Europe alone. Europe can provide leadership, it can provide insights, but what Europe is in a different position than most of the world. So we need to talk to the rest of the world about these issues. So, yeah, I'm interested in any suggestions on how to do this, and obviously, yeah, it's a conversation I'd like to continue. But Maria, you might have some.
That's a very good question, Anna, because indeed in the Transdisciplinary Advisory Board of the GPI Climate, we had to answer asking these questions to ourselves, because there we have is a mix of scientists and policymakers and stakeholders. And what we notice is that it is very important to have a very in-depth discussion about how to communicate what we are finding in science in a way that is very difficult to actually deny that that's what is happening. And the messages need to be very, very well defined. Usually doesn't work very well when you do it on the spot. So one of the things that probably we will start thinking in GPI Climate, at least in the top, is thinking on what are actually the fundamental messages and how actually to convey them in a way that it is extremely difficult to say this is confusing, this is not true, or this is uncertain. And I think this is an effort, and there social science are important there. We need social scientists also to tell us what are the levers that will allow to shape messages that are arriving to the policymakers and the society in general, that cannot be sort of say that this is the opinion of scientists, or this is the opinion of one scientist but not the other, and things like that. So if in Europe we do that, where we are 27 countries, then we can show that this is possible. So I think GPI Climate can be a safe space where we can start assigning this type of discussions on how to best communicate the fundamental message that are coming from the state of the climate. Even advise that when they produce a document like that, they may need to be some more strategic. I think that's also a very important message.
Yeah, actually, we're more than 27 countries with the European Research Area, so. But the other thing that often the facts are not enough, and one of the innovations I'm looking at for next May is to bring in some people with the vision, because talking about 1.5 or 2 or 1.6 overshoot, all of those things, they don't resonate with society that readily. So I'm trying to actually get some of the champions that are here and some of the visionary people to provide short messages on the vision of the future Earth, which would be trying to build that compelling narrative for change that we need to have. We need to be able to persuade people that this is good for them. We intrinsically know it's good for them, but they are not persuaded in certain sectors. So we need to have that sort of vision of the future, which is articulated not in numbers or whatever, or by IEMs, et cetera. So I'm trying to talk to a few people here about bringing that sort of section in. And also, just to highlight, there's so many initiatives here that are really unique and good and useful, but we need a framework around them, sort of the methane pledge, the BOGA. It'd be useful to have a framework that brings their initiatives under one tent, that we could say, this is contributing this is contributing that. So that's way forward I'm hoping for. But please.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Frank. Anna has a question on information. I've got my question is linked to information. How can GPI help on fighting on misinformation or disinformation, fake information?
I do love the hard questions. I think disinformation, I mean, the way to deal with disinformation is just stick with the facts. So, and I think what we have to do is to is to use all of the facts that we have. We know what's happening to our planet, and we have the information from Copernicus, we have the information from the WMO, we have the information from all of those people. We need to make it accessible, not to scare people, but to make people aware this is real, this is not a hoax, to sort of counter a message that came from an ex-party to the Paris Agreement. So it's important that we stick with the narrative around the facts. And I suppose one of the things that, the way I look at this, those who are trying to provide disinformation and undermine the messages, the reason they're doing this is that they are scared of the science. They're scared of the facts. And they're trying to cut off the source of the information, the source of the facts. So what we need to do is to ensure that the sources are maintained and that the facts are out there on a regular basis. And again, as I said to Anna, you won't win alone with the facts, but you will win if you have human stories about how this is going to affect you, your children, your grandchildren, next generation, and have a counter to that which is positive. How we can have a sustainable future, that clean energy, clean air, clean water, good food, that vision of the future where societies are stable rather than instability. And what most people in the world just want stability. That's the key for them. Stability in terms of income, stability in terms of living in communities that are healthy and vibrant, and where they can enjoy life and culture, etc. So doing that and having the combination of the facts with the narrative, I think, is the way forward to deal with misinformation. Maria, do you want to answer, or do you want to say something?
Well, I think it's very easy to transform a fact into a misinformation if the other side, it doesn't understand it, right? So it's very easy to manipulate when the recipient side doesn't understand what you're talking about. So for me, it's a combination in between education, so, you know, in embedding all these more environmental and social, you know, issues that we are facing into the system of education. We had an experience in Spain that I think it merits to be shared. We organized a Citizens Climate Change Assembly, and it was quite interesting to see that when we put these 100 people in a room for enough time, provided neutral facts, and giving them the time to discuss and ask, they ended up with very reasonable proposals. But at the same time, they decided that they became the first ones to promote that was a need to address climate change, and it was a need, an urgent need and an emergency. So after this assembly, we had 100 people in Spain that was going to the schools, it was going to the regional authorities, it was going to meetings. They created an association, and they are teaching other social groups what their experience was. So what shows to me that if you create the spaces for people to understand what it's about, participate in discussions, and those spaces are secure enough, then they become someone that can deal with the misinformation. Otherwise, it's very difficult, because most of the things that are communicated, a large percentage of society, they don't know what you're talking about. So another thing that is very important is to sort of shift the narratives into something positive. Out of something negative, you can come with transitions that actually are solving other problems that you had at the same time that you address the climate change issues. So the combination of these two things, it can go slowly into a society that is able or more able to handle the misinformation. Eh? But we also have to be aware that the people that is trying to manipulate the messages is also learning. So we have to actually be aware of how they are shifting their strategies on how to promote the misinformation. But these three things combined, I think it could help actually to overcome a little bit the situation we have now. This week, one of the senators of the Democrat senators of the U.S. was here in this pavilion having a conversation, no? And he was very strong, saying, we have a dramatic transformation of the lobbying in the Senate now, because they are learning. They are learning actually how to do leverage in different types of communities across the society of the U.S. to manipulate. So, and it's clear that it's also happening somehow in Europe, in some of the countries where some particular groups are emerging very strongly. So I think is education, is common understanding, is actual participation and secure spaces for discussion for society. And that probably will help us to overcome part of the problem.
Okay. Since there's no sign of her friend Oli Christian, I might just mention the AMOC and what we're doing in the AMOC. As many of you will know, our friends from Denmark certainly will know. Or did you want to come back with a further follow-up? No. Yeah. There's been a lot of media headlines about the stability of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, which is a key feature of the whole ocean current circulation, and I suppose it gets a lot of attention in Europe because if it collapses, Europe sees a very difficult future for itself. And so those projections that it would collapse, I think 2055 or 60 were published and got a lot of headlines. Now obviously there's a counter narrative which says it's quite stable and it will likely not significantly collapse during this century. So, but in order to avoid this ongoing media headlines and discussions, and many scientists actually wrote to the Arctic Council about this, about the need to have some sort of clarity in what's going on. JPI Climate and JPI Oceans decided to establish a process to update the information contained in the IPCC 6th assessment report on the AMOC, and to bring in all of the top scientists from the various, I suppose, camps, if I use that term, in Europe to work on that. So we had a meeting last January which we agreed the outline scope. We also agreed that the project would be led by Hans Otto Portner, who was co-chair of Working Group 2 of the 6th assessment report, and Gerard McCarthy, who's a leading ocean scientist in Ireland. And we had a call for authors across Europe as well. And what we have now is we have established writing teams for that report. They're starting working on it. There will be a meeting in Italy in January. Hopefully drafts will be available for review by actors, by experts, and by country specialists as well, so that we can have a robust report, largely developed hopefully by summertime, and we'll be able to start road testing some of the messages. As Maria said, it's important to road test messages in order to ensure that they're accessible to the policymakers, but also to people. I mean, there's no point in having an excellent report if it's just read by experts. You need this information to be available to everybody. And the report should be completely finalized by next December, and I think Denmark has offered to host a launch, And yeah, there might be some competition for that, Denmark, I must say, but we'll see how that goes. And what I would say is I think that's sort of an initiative that we can do. We can take a specific topic, and I must say the members of the research community who joined the scoping meeting, and they were from across Europe, were delighted at the opportunity to do this because, as I said, even if for the IPCC to do this, you have very few actual authors, or who, because of the complexity of the IPCC report, very few of the authors would be experts in this topic, and therefore a lot of experts feel excluded. So to avoid the immediate, I suppose, response to the IPCC report, which happens inevitably, some saying it's too extreme, others saying it's not extreme enough, or whatever wording you like. This gives us an opportunity to bring the key actors in there. Another feature of this initiative is that our friends from Canada are really interested in as well, and they've brought in additional financial support, and we'll have experts writing that report as well. And that's all I want to say about it now, unless Maria, you would like to add something?
No, I think that we already showed that having this flexible space, it is extremely important to anticipate and be reactive on the spot to actually the needs that the integration of knowledge, which is becoming a very, very important part of what the scientific community is doing, because the complexity of the problem is so high. And I think I'm very pleased to be called to be part of the advisory board, and I hope and I really appreciate the space that GPI climate and the processes that are launched is going to allow the science in Europe to be, let's say, more influential, even more influential than we were in the next assessments at the global level, but at the same time be more able to probably interface with other scientific communities, like for example in the Asian sites or in the US. We are importing a lot of US scientists now into Europe, so that also may be something that will help. But I think we have to protect this type of species, no? Like API climate, and the secure spaces for science to discuss.
Yeah.
And to shape how we communicate. That's, I think, extremely important.
And finally, I suppose from my side, just to highlight that we have a European focus, but we have a global vision as well. And part of that global vision is we're doing a whole big initiative on climate services for Africa, which is being led by Germany and France. And I think that's another welcome development. And with that, I think we've said all.
Any questions? Any other question from the public, from the audience?
Yeah, thank you for this interesting presentation and sharing the information about GPI. What I didn't hear, and I think that's very important for policymakers, that is the impacts of overshoots. We are inevitably going over this 1.5 degree, and that means that this overshoot will have some impacts. And we, as you know, we have fast changes like extreme precipitation, but also slow onsets, and that might give very different effects. And the narrative of these impacts is, I think, a very important one. And I don't know how much is taken up by IPCC. We shouldn't redo that, but to have the initiative to produce publications and so on, I think that's also important for GPI. Thank you.
Yeah, as I say, I do love the hard questions, Rob. Yeah, that's an interesting challenge, and I think it'll come out of the Climate Neutrality Forum that we'll have next May about this overshoot issue, because to the best of my knowledge, nearly every integrated assessment model sees a temporary overshoot and return to 1.5, and that creates its own political, technical, and feasibility challenges. And I think, yes, that is something that we'll have to look at. I think I'll park it for now, because I think that's something, as I said, that's come out of the forum, and it's an extremely important topic, and we need to start thinking about it. But we also have to start thinking about how to ensure anything like that is as limited and temporary as possible. But yeah, let's leave it at that, Rob. But thanks. Maria, do you want to?
No, I think it's an important topic, and I guess the point is that we as scientists understand it in one way, but how to translate that to the policymakers is also very important, because what we want is that the impression that we can go through an overshoot, it doesn't actually give the impression that you can decelerate the decarbonization action, right? So this is something that is appearing in a lot of documents, and I think it's important to have a discussion about how to manage the concept, also in the interface with policymakers and with society as a whole as well, because this is a concept that is very difficult to communicate to society, for example. So if there is no other questions, well, thank you for listening to us. It was, I have to say that we are friends, so it's easy to talk.
Yeah, apologies. We should have Ole Christian here to give us another voice, but
yeah, Ole couldn't come, so
yeah, but
he excused himself. He was trapped into something else.
but thanks for the immediate feedback and those questions as well. They were very good. Thank you.
We couldn't have better audience. I mean, I think we are very proud that everyone comes, and all the friends are here. So thank you very much.
Thank you.